First thing to set up in SoundBridge is the audio driver and interface to be used for playback and recording. On Mac, you would use a core audio driver. On Windows, we suggest using ASIO drivers. ASIO stands for Audio Streaming Input-Output, and it was developed by Steinberg. You should select the audio interface you wish to use in the Devices dialog. You can use the Input-Output button to open a dialog where you can activate or deactivate input and output channels on your device. To adjust the properties of your audio device, you can use the Control Panel button. Sample Rate dialog will display a list of sample rates supported by your audio device to choose from. This will be the rate at which audio will be sampled in your project. Think of this setting as the resolution of the audio frequency range. The higher the resolution, the more accuracy you get, at the cost of CPU strain. Higher sample rates require more processing power. 44.1 kHz is the standard sample rate for music, and it's the sample rate at which we experience most professional music productions. Buffer size, in case of ASIO drivers, is the same for input and output, and it determines the block size at which audio is processed. The lower the buffer size is, less latency you will experience, but you will have a higher CPU usage. The higher the buffer size, your CPU will have less strain, but you will experience latency when monitoring live inputs through SoundBridge. Recording latency offset will allow you to offset your recording with a positive or negative value in the sequencer's timeline. Latency display shows the last updated overall latency and how it's divided between the input and the output. Lastly, the Use Recommended Buffer Size will change the buffer size to a recommended one. If an ASIO driver is not available for your card, you can select one of the Windows drivers in the Sound Card Driver menu, which will allow you to select a different input and output device. The audio panel will slightly change when Windows drivers is selected to show you a flexible and separate input and output buffer sizes. In the MIDI section, you can enable or disable your MIDI input and output devices. When enabled, Device to All checkmark will ensure that the device it is checked for is included in the aggregated Device to All selection that is located in the MIDI input track combo boxes. Plugin Locations section will allow adding or removing directories that contain VST plugins. These directories will be scanned for plugins every time you start SoundBridge. Alternatively, you can use the Find New button to find new plugins or the Full Rescan button to initiate a full plugin rescan. The blacklist allows you to add plugins that you want SoundBridge not to scan in case they cause problems. In fact, while scanning, if any plugin causes any issues, SoundBridge will offer you to add those to the blacklist. Shortcuts panel allows you to define your own shortcuts for all the actions listed. You can do that by selecting the shortcut you want, placing the cursor in the Press Shortcut Keys field, pressing the shortcut you want, and clicking the Assign button. If the shortcut you use is already in use by another function, it will be displayed right here. Alternatively, you can use the Reset All button to reset all the shortcuts to defaults. The next section holds some options for our sequencer. Match block to track color, when enabled, will make all the MIDI, audio, and automation blocks to adapt their color to the track they belong to. Create fades and block edges will automatically apply a 4 millisecond fade in and out to imported audio blocks. When enabled, this function will make it so that the arrows used to resize blocks or MIDI notes are shown. Blocks and notes can still be resized without those errors being shown by grabbing the block or note edges. Resume playback from last start position, which is a premium feature, will, when enabled, make it so that the playback starts from where the playhead was placed manually. When disabled, playback will start from the position where the playback has stopped, turning stop into kind of a pause function. The plugin section will allow us to change the settings and default behaviors related to plugins. Auto plugin latency compensation will, when enabled, compensate for any latency introduced by plugins. Latency compensation units determines the units which are used to display the latency that the plugins are introducing, or that you are introducing by using manual latency control. Scan VSTs mode will toggle between the two VST scanning methods. When enabled, SoundBridge will launch and scan for VST plugins in the background. When disabled, SoundBridge will start only once plugin scanning has been completed. Legacy VST3 detection, when enabled, will make SoundBridge display the VST3 version of all plugins that contain both VST2 and VST3 versions in one DLL file. When disabled, only the VST2 will be preferred and displayed. Show plugin post-drag drop will, when enabled, make it so that any plugin loaded gets displayed automatically. Recording section holds all of the audio and MIDI recording settings that can be adjusted. Auto audio recording latency compensation, when enabled, will compensate the timing of recorded audio for the overall audio driver latency. Auto arm selected track, when enabled, will automatically arm any selected audio or MIDI track. Recording overwrites audio will make it so that audio recorded over existing audio blocks overwrites them. When disabled, audio recorded over existing blocks will add them to the block Z order dialog. When you enable discard last partial take, recordings that do not fill the entire loop duration are discarded when recording into a take list. Recording bit depth determines the bit depth of the audio being recorded with SoundBridge, as well as the audio being rendered due to processing, freezing in place, or freezing to a new track. The GUI section allows you to choose a different skin, set a different scale to SoundBridge, which will multiply the vectors of the software in intervals of 25%. You can also enable or disable having floating widgets, and you can also restore widgets to default. This is really useful if at some point you find that some of the widgets are missing or are off screen. Just click this button and SoundBridge goes back to its default look. Finally, let's go through all the settings in the global page. If you enable Project Autosave, SoundBridge will periodically overwrite a backup copy of your project. Waveform anti-aliasing, when enabled, will make the waveforms look smoother, but it might affect performance on lower-tier hardware. Multi-core support enables or disables multi-core processor support. Windows on-screen keyboard will enable or disable the Windows built-in on-screen keyboard. Show update notifications enables a display prompt in SoundBridge that tells you that a newer version is available for download. Default MIDI input allows you to select a MIDI controller or another MIDI input device that will automatically be selected as a MIDI input for a newly created MIDI track. Metronome sound opens a dialog where the metronome sound can be selected. In the template section, you can save the current project as the default project so it loads upon opening SoundBridge, or you can restore this to factory default.